Aloha, everyone, and welcome to Soil Beats Ideas Live show for Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021. We want to welcome you all, and as always, to let you know that we are live, and so we hope that you will join us in whatever capacity you wish to. You are welcome to make comments through the hour that we'll be having this conversation, to ask questions, and we will do our best to include you in the conversation that we're going to have today. Today, we are talking about soil, and we've got three wonderful people here with us to talk about soil today. The one person who isn't here with us is Ray Archuleta, who was scheduled to be here with us and who is just not feeling well at the moment. So we're confident that Ray will come back and join us for a show at some point in the future. But today, Bob Shaffer very generously stepped in at the last moment. He is another person who is incredibly knowledgeable about soil. So we're really happy to have you here. Bob is a farmer over in Kona. We also have Travis Thomason, who is here from the NRCS, the Natural Resources Soil Conservation Division of the USDA. And Travis is the Executive Director for the Pacific region of the NRCS. And we have Vincent Mina, and Vince is joining us from Maui, where he's a farmer, and Vince is also the president of the Hawaii Farmers Union United. So we're thrilled to have all three of you here, three of you who are each in your own way very knowledgeable about soil. And what we love to do to start off these shows is to ask people to take a minute or two to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about the journey in life that has led them to be connected to the topic that we're talking about today and to have a feeling of passion for the topic that we're talking about today. So Bob, would you start us off with sharing a little bit about your own journey towards soil?
Certainly. Thank you, Julia. And thank you, everybody, for being here today and attending. Thanks to NRCS for bringing Travis and the Hawaii Farmers Association for allowing Vincent to be here. Aloha, everyone. I started out gardening, and when I was a gardener in high school, my mother taught me how to make compost. And by the time I started my first small farm about 5 years later, I remembered composting, and I became the composter for us. And it was compost that led me back to soil. I wasn't really interested in farming per se or soil per se, but it was health that I was looking for. I was a health food nut in the early 70s. And so all through the 70s, we were small farmers. We didn't use pesticide or herbicides or fertilizers because we didn't know them. We didn't trust them. So everything was about compost and cover crops for us. By 1990, I was cover cropping around 1,000 acres for Wente vineyards in Northern California. These are wine grape vineyards. By 2000, I was teaching a cover crop class for Napa Valley College. It was an 18-week course. I taught it for 8 years until the budget was removed by Reagan, I think it was at the time. And I am a farmer now. I have a small farm in Kona. We raise perennials. We have around 45 different genus and species that we're raising right now, some on a small scale. But I work in Australia. I just finished about 9 years of working on cover crops in Australia for soil care and land care. You can find some of that work at the Northern Rivers soilcare.org. And I work in Guatemala. I work all up and down the West Coast of North America. And of course, I've been here in Hawaii since 1994. The first jobs I had here were cover cropping at Kona Mountain Farm, Maui Land and Pine. I wrote a farm plan for them that included cover crops, and on since then. I work for a Kauai coffee company right now where we are implementing large blocks of cover crops, composting, entirely changing our system over to a focus on two things: diversity of plants above ground, below ground, and soil health.
Okay, I know we're going to learn a lot from you today, Bob. Travis, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Aloha kako. I'm Travis Thomason. I'm the director for USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. We are a federal private lands conservation agency that works with farmers and ranchers to implement conservation solutions on their operations that address natural resource issues. And soil health is a huge part of what we do. My background, I grew up in the small rural state of Idaho, and my family had a ranch up in rural county in Idaho and just grew to love agriculture. And I think when it comes to soil, I have a background in agronomy and have worked with NRCS for about 17 years now, all throughout the country. And have a minor in soil science, so I understand that soils are critical to the success of agriculture. And if I can quote FDR in his assessment of soils and how important they are to a country, not only to the environment, but to the economy. He said, a country that destroys soils destroys itself. And so we're anxious and excited to let everybody know about soil health and the other things that we do. And grateful to Bob and Vincent that they are so knowledgeable in this area and excited to have this conversation. So thank you again, happy to be here.
Okay. Vince, turning to you.
Aloha, everybody. Vincent Mina. I am a family farmer, have been since 1994 with my wife, Irene, and our 2 children. And, you know, I got my head wrapped around soil health when I went to a Acres USA conference in 1998 and came back with a passion to make that my life work. We had our first soil health conference, which Bob Shaffer actually spoke at in 1998. And then in bringing it forward was through Maui Aloha Aina Association. My wife and I put on body and soil conferences because we knew that soil health was connected to human health. And so that's why we connected, made the conferences in exploring this relationship between the body and the soil as being an essential part of moving this needle forward. So I'm very tickled and excited to be at this place right now that we're speaking about this today. Julia Steele, you're a rock star. Love your work very much with Civil Beat and appreciate you holding this space for these sessions of ideas. And I look forward to where we can get to today.
Thank you. Thanks, Vincent. Thank you all. So as a starting point for today's conversation, I'd love it if we could talk about Hawaii's soil itself. If we could, and Bob, maybe you could start with this, so that the viewers have an understanding of the characteristics of the soil, the needs of the soil, the varieties of the soil. When we talk about restoring the soil, first, I feel like we need a baseline understanding of what are the unique qualities of our soil here in the islands, what are the needs that they have, where do they tend to be stronger, where do they tend to maybe not be as fertile as they might be. You know, what is the nature and the identity of our soils in the islands?
Well, that's quite a question.
Yeah.
Quite a statement. And I will say this to start out before the confusion sets in. Chemistry and biology and physics apply around the world. And so our soils are more like other soils than they are dislike other soils. Okay. I thought I was a pretty good soil scientist and an agronomist and a farmer before I came to Hawaii. But as soon as I got in Hawaii, I found out that this was my big next class. This was my next learning. Because here, particularly on Hawaii Island, we have young soils and we have the island that's quite large actually, and we have younger soils on the south and older soils on the north. And for someone who loves soils and interested in where did this come from? Where did it start? What is it? My students and I spend almost our entire time together exploring what is it, what are the parts of soil, and where are they located? How do they interact? People ask me about what soil is, and I say, well, I'm going to approach this with you from a mechanistic view. Chemistry, biology, and physics apply. The mechanics of soil need to be understood by the farmer and by us as gardeners or farmers, or we can't fix it. We can't prevent it from being broken. With young soils and older soils, we get to see how they develop. Where is it? all the rocks. I love people coming to our islands and looking at the rocks and going, well, there's a huge tree, but it's all rock. Trees grow in rocks. When trees grow in soil, the soil's down there. It's deeper in the rock. Our soils here range from, as all soils do across the world, the diversity types are numerous. Our type of soil will change within a few feet or within a few yards. And this is because of how soils form. Part of your question was, well, where are certain soils on our islands? If you follow the climate and the weather, you'll get to see where soil is. The Hawaiians did not make mistakes. When they came to the islands, it seems to be apparent that they came to where large trees were because that's where the soil was. And by removing some trees, we end up with places to grow. This is what we did in North America. It started on the East Coast and it moved across to the West Coast over time of taking down trees, planting there, and then they didn't know how to handle those soils, so they would need to move to the next tree spot, take those down and plant again. We've learned a lot about how to prevent damage to soils and how to repair damage in soils, but we have a diversity of soils here. We have soils that are very rocky. We have soils that have good humus levels, and really to understand this, follow the weather pattern. Where there's more rain, there's more plants, as plants are the primary producer on Earth. And it's the symbiosis between plants and microbes that produces soils. So if we follow the water, which is generally on our island at around 1,000 foot, I mean, I'm on the dry side. On the wet side, it's a little different. It'll go right down to the ocean. But on our side of this island, for example, our rain is higher up high at 2,500 feet. There's lots of rain. Down at 100 feet, there's not much rain. My farm's at about 750 feet. A lot of farms are at that elevation or just up to 1,000 feet because there's enough water. It's formed soils down in the rock. We actually have a very good growing environment. A wide diversity of soils, but three areas of science that cover them: biology, chemistry, and physics.
All right. Travis or Vince, is there anything you want to add to that, looking at the characteristics of soil?
Yeah, if I can, Julie, I think two things come to mind as Bob was answering that question. First thing is USDA publishes what's called a soil survey, and it's essentially a macro level scale of mapping soils here in Hawaii and across the nation. That soils information is available at websoilsurvey.usda.gov, or if someone wanted to Google web soil survey, an individual can actually go, they can map out their property boundary, and they can actually find a lot of information about their soils at a general level online. And when I think about the practical application of soil health, all of those things, there is a lot of general information about chemical, physical, biological function of soils. But really, we find when we work with individual producers, our mission is to deliver conservation solutions so that ag producers can conserve natural resources and feed a growing world. We recognize that every operation is unique. And although you may have two operations that are in the same general soils area, a lot of the things that they can do to regenerate their soil really depends on what's happened over time. And so when we talk about things that producers can do, it really just depends on the local site-specific conditions and how it's been used in the past.
Right. So that gets a little bit to, now we've sort of talked a little bit about some of the natural characteristics of the soil, and then looking at how it's been used in the past. We know that there was some very aggressive monocropping in the islands around sugar and pineapple. So what has that done to our soils?
Whew. I stand on the shoulders of many And thankfully, those people that I stand on the shoulders of, I've learned a lot around what happens when you monocrop an area. And just think about driving, it's like our own bodies. If we drive calcium out of our bodies, osteoporosis sets in. Well, in soil, if you drive the calcium out of the soil with high nitrogen fertilizers, osteoporosis of the soil. You know, you have a situation where it tightens the soil with monocrop and chemical fertilizers. They just tighten and tighten and tighten to where these companies have to go back with more horsepower to open them back up to plant again. And it becomes a real problem, especially with, I did a TED talk on this in 2012 where I did a demonstration that showed that when you cover the top, and we're talking about cover crops today, when you cover the top of the soil and you allow water to filtrate down, it recharges the aquifer. So if the soils are adobe, if they're tight at the top, water's just going to run off and it's going to take soil with it out into the ocean. And so that's one of the biggest problems that we're having is, and Bob has been very articulate about this over the years regarding the importance of, you know, our soils not being eroded and losing our soils that we do have, you know, because it does take a lot of time to develop.
Yeah. Bob, can you add to that?
There is a lot of documentation about what has happened to our soils, and there's widespread agreement on the loss of diversity and the loss of soil organic matter, resulting in a number of symptoms that farmers have problems with. By 1936, the USDA had published this a book. By 1938, excuse me, Soils and Men was published as a USDA yearbook. It documented, after the Dust Bowl, what happened to farm soils in the US. All states, including Hawaii, were surveyed from 1900 to 1936. And it's really depressing to read this because it outlines the lack of diversification, the erosion of our farm soils in the US, with devastating loss of carbon to the soil. We understand now better where the carbon in the soil has went. It's went into the air. The growing of sugarcane by Dr. Humbert is available here in Hawaii, The Growing of Sugarcane. And this book, oh my God, it's like my Bible. I carry it around with me because this book, and Vincent will laugh, he's been seeing this for 25 years, tells you more about what to do with Hawaii soils and what happened to Hawaii soils than is imaginable. These people were expert agronomists, but they were caught in a system that was making so much money that they all worked to try to pull it off, even with the conditions. We're left with the destruction from those practices. They knew it during the operations. They knew that they worked their soils too wet. They knew that they needed calcium. They knew that organic matter levels were dropping in the soils each year, and they were struggling more all the time to get it back. Increased tillage, larger equipment, increased salts, increased herbicide and fungicide, resulting in lack of diversity and lack of health in our soils. That's where we are now with cane soils and pine soils. By the way, Australia has exactly the same thing going on. I just worked 10 years with both Bear and Soil Care, and still am currently working on those soils as Australia is in the process of planting everything that California grows, because they are projecting California is not going to be producing those crops much longer.
That book that you showed us, what year was that published?
Soils and Men was published in
The other one, Bob.
1962. This copy was it's around 1965. It's property of Kohala Sugar Company, 1965. I can't tell you how good this book is. It's shocking, but they talk about more useful technique in here than any other agronomy manual I've ever found. They understood antagonism of minerals. They understood how to do simple trials. This was before computers, and people had to be very practical about their thinking. These were incredible agronomists. They failed, but they were incredible agronomists.
You know, Bobby, it speaks to also, you know, the fact that we live in a biomass machine, Hawaii. You know, anybody that has any kind of flora growing on their property and they cut it back, it comes back with a vengeance. You know, and so the problem, from my point of view, is that, you know, people don't realize, they think Hawaii, you know, hula girls and tropical weather and everything. It's very extreme weather to our soils, you know, especially when they're not covered. And so, you know, that biomass that we have growing above the ground, unfortunately, right now is being cut down at the coastlines for the view, and which brings in the winds aggressively and drying out our soils. And then that biomass is not being composted and put back onto the soil to cover it and to bring more biology, more life into that soil. And so that's become an issue in the spirit of rebuilding our soils.
Well put, Vincent. And just quickly, as we have been investigating what are our local soils like, when I first came here, 1994, like I was saying, I had been farming for nearly 20 years at the time. I asked people who were good farmers here, what makes your soils better? And the answer was counterintuitive to me because of all the organic matter. They would always reply, adding more organic matter to our soils makes our soils better. Then as I started to sample them, I've done thousands of soil samples here. As I started to sample these soils, it's tricky because with the temperate soil eye, you might rank the organic matter levels too low. Yes, adding, to segue to what do we do with these soils? I'm anxious to hear from everyone. What are you doing with these soils now to repair them? Because organic matter loss lies at the heart of this, and we need the cover crop and other uses such as other practices such as cover crops to get organic matter back in these soils, which drives aggregation.
I'm curious, since you mentioned these incredible agronomists from 1965 and how akamai they were, what were they recommending?
They were realizing that the heavy equipment hauling cane was crushing the soil, and it was ruining the structure of soil. So the good structure of soil is that feature that gives us pore spaces. We're in a pore space right now. We have air, we have water, we have room to move. Picture in the soil that there are spaces just like we live in. And when they become very small, they become dysfunctional for the roots. So the question is, where are the roots in soil? Where are they? Just willy-nilly every place? No, they are in the pore space. So if we're crushing the pore space, where are the roots? So they knew about soil compaction, and they knew that they were caught in a conundrum. The management was saying, move on, get out there and harvest this stuff. No, we're not going to rotate. We're going to go back into cane. And everything starts to move towards bigger production, do it faster, larger equipment, and the soil becomes harder and harder and harder. I am guilty of being a person that makes my living from hard soil. The phenomenon of hard soil, I can see Travis smiling. Hard soils are the problem. If they're hard, you can't do anything. So we need to regenerate these soils, diversify and improve the health of these soils, or there's no pore spaces. They knew this.
And that's really a great point, Bobby, too, because, you know, people go, oh, my soil's full of nematodes. Well, there's beneficial nematodes and parasitic nematodes, and the bigger animals are the beneficial ones that actually eat the parasitic ones, the smaller animals. But when you compact the soil, the first ones to get killed are the bigger animals, the beneficial nematodes. And so what's left behind are the parasitic ones, and that's what they're using these fungicides for. And it was notorious with pineapple production. They would use methyl bromide, and that got outlawed. You know, it's just a calamity of errors. When Ray Archuleta, who would have been on today, I love how he speaks about emulating nature's architecture. You know, that's our call to arms here, you know, emulating nature's already existing architecture. We don't need to reinvent nature. All we need to do is work within the laws of nature, and magic happens.
Travis, is there anything you want to add in here?
Yeah, you know, I love listening to Bob. You can tell this is his passion, and you know, I think Vincent and I have talked a lot about this issue. We just need more people that are passionate about really protecting the land. And we recognize that perhaps the past was not perfect, but we have an opportunity for a super bright future. And I think that's what this discussion is about, is, you know, taking the lands that maybe have been mismanaged in the past, maybe some things they could have done better. Perhaps we have some operators today that are thinking, how can I do better? And I think that's the beauty of this, is that there are resources out there to help bridge that gap of where you are now or where you've been in the past and what future success looks like. And, you know, we talk about the key principles of soil health, and we can spend some time talking about those things. And Bob and Vincent have already mentioned that, but there is a path forward. And we recognize that it's a conservation partnership or a soil health partnership that really will help move things forward in the future.
You know, Travis, on that point, it's really important for people to know is that even though I'm an organic farmer, Bob's an organic farmer, there are some amazing conventional farmers out there. I learned so much from farmers. And so we're not here to make any one or any practice wrong. It's just that farmers are finding out more and more now that when you overproduce your soils, or when you don't feed your soils, when you don't grow your soil first before you grow your plants, you run into problems. And that's what we're looking to mitigate. That's why we want to bring stakeholders to the table and be able to have this discussion around direction and be able to facilitate that direction with tools like NRCS provides through federal funding and local governments, you know, to get, you know, I sit on the Board of Agriculture here in Hawaii, and I'm having this conversation with the board around developing strategies that we can bring about more of an agricultural system here in Hawaii.
So let's talk about that, the regeneration, and Bob, maybe we can come back to you at this point. I mean, you were mentioning that you see some similarities with Australia, and you've been working in Australia for the last decade. Can you tell us something about the specifics of how soil actually is restored, what you yourself have been involved in, and what you think is really needed and called for in Hawaii now, given the point that we're at?
Well, I couldn't agree more that we have great resources now. There's lots of information about what to do. There's lots of information about what has happened. And we're going to mention them in a minute, but there's groundbreaking new research on what cover crops have been doing, what they're capable of doing right now. Oh my gosh. My entire orientation towards my clients and towards my work in soils and agronomy is as a farmer. I can only speak truthfully about what I've done and what I've experienced, but certainly our highest goal is the emulation of nature. We can go to nature as a model and get into a transition. This is not going to be an instant change. It did not happen overnight. It is not repaired overnight. So the first thing to do is to accept that this is going to take time. Oh, there will be leaps here and there in nature, but generally it's a slower process. It's going to be a transition. And for me, there's just 3 groups of cultural practices that explain where cover crops are in this system. Cover crops used alone are in vain. Compost alone in vain. Anything alone in vain in attempts to emulate nature. So we're going to be in a transition that has basically 3 groups to me. Organic matter management, that's cover crops, compost, and mulches. Number 2, nutrient management. And this is referring to in the soil, not above ground. Nutrient management, meaning use soil analysis. Balance the nutrients in soil. If you want to learn about antagonism of minerals and what happens if you get one too high and one too low, go to this book. It's the first one that uses the word antagonism back in the 60s. You can't find anybody talking about it now, let alone in the 60s. So we want balance of nutrients in soil, number 2. Number 3, tillage that is a beneficial event. I don't call it non-tillage because I can show you orchards and fields and vineyards that haven't been tilled for 25 years that are a mess. So we're looking for tillage that is a beneficial disturbance, not a setback. And there's many things to consider there, but these 3 groups of practices support the 9 animals on the surface of the soil, the 4 microorganisms groups below soil that produce 7 functions. The 7 functions produced by the 4 groups of organisms below soil, 9 animals on top, are all we have. We have 7 things that bacteria, fungi, nematode, and protozoa produce for the plant and produce for the soil that are irreplaceable. We can't buy them. I can't call anybody and have them bring over a truckload of them. We have to use carbon and plants, which are the primary producer on Earth. Plants are the primary producer on Earth. And by harnessing plants, emulating nature as farmers, we get in position to use these 3 groups of practices. It takes a lifetime of experience. It takes a lifetime of learning, but that's what we have to work with as farmers for soil health.
Mhm. It's just so magical.
Truly.
Maybe at this point in the conversation, we could talk a little bit about some specific projects. And I don't know, Bob, if you want to, examples of a piece of land that had been suffering and what you actually did to help bring it back. These practices that you mentioned, the cover crops, making sure that the nutrients are balanced, making sure that the tillage isn't out of control. Maybe some, Travis, I don't know if there are examples that the NRCS has been involved with, or just if there are some ways in which we can help the viewers have an experience of what this is actually like, what the soil goes through when it goes from being depleted to more nourished.
Yeah, I can share a couple of things. So I guess to provide some context on really what my team, so we have offices all throughout the Pacific on each of the islands here in Hawaii, and I have a team of agronomists, soil conservationists, folks that will go out and meet with producers one-on-one. So all of the services we provide are voluntary. We're a non-regulatory agency, and so when people find out about us on, if they go to farmers.gov, they'll give us a call and they will just say, hey, will you guys come? I'm interested in soil health or cover crops or something. And then we'll go out and on their ground and we'll talk to them a little bit about their operations. So we'll ask them, what crops are you growing? What nutrients, what fertilizers are you using? Is this organic, conventional operation? Just a litany of questions just to find out about their operation. And then we'll make recommendations, and I'll give you some examples here in a second, but these recommendations very similar to Bob's key areas, but we talk about 1, armoring the soil, so keeping the soil covered. We talk about mimicking nature, and we just want to make sure, whether it be live plants or dead residue, we want to see the ground at least 75% covered with some sort of residue. That helps keep soil temperatures lower, helps manage moisture within the soil. Number 2, we really promote minimal soil disturbance. So if you are tilling all the time and you don't need to till, or maybe there's an operation that you can take out of your tillage operation, we're going to promote minimizing soil disturbance, whatever that may be on your operation. Third, we talk about plant diversity, which means, we talked a little bit about monocropping. We talk about crop rotation. The more diversity, the higher number of plants that you can get into a soil, the more we see that the microbial organisms are much more diverse. And so it really creates this buffer, if you will, within the soil that can really handle different stress factors. And the last one that we really like to talk to people about is keep living roots in the ground year round. So feed the soil, and that has a lot to do with cover crops and other things. And so some of the things that we're seeing right now, some of our producers, and we'll work with hundreds of producers a year throughout Hawaii and the Pacific. And we see a lot of cover crop going on. So when we talk about those 4 principles, we recognize that some operations can adopt all 4, some operations can maybe only adopt a couple. we really want people to have a good experience. So we're not going to go into an operation and say, hey, this is a horrible operation. This is what you need to do. That's kind of like telling someone that, you know, your kids are unattractive or something. That conversation is not going to go well, right? So we walk in and we help them to see the purpose of soil health and really helping them adopt some of those key principles. We're seeing a lot of folks take advantage of cover crops, sun hemp, if you will, nitrogen fixer. We're seeing some folks put in what we call cover crop mixes. So it's not just one cover crop, you know, perhaps sorghum, Sudan grass, sun hemp, triticale. Producers are using mustard as a form of weed control and just a natural fumigant against weeds and other diseases. We're seeing a lot of producers trying to get into a composting and using more of a natural mulch to manage that moisture and put a lot of, I guess, organic material back in the soils. I mean, the list, I asked my team to send me examples and photos, and the stories just go on and on of producers that are really interested in cover crops in particular. But we're also seeing a lot of mulching, crop rotation, you name it. I think there's folks that are really interested in these things.
You know, it's so critical too, Julia, because like right now you folks are all practicing cover cropping, right? Whether you realize it or not, because look at your hair, you know, it's covering your head. Me, I'm out in the sun, you know, too long, I got problems, you know, so I have to, you know, literally I have to have a cap on, I have to cover, you know, it's the same, there's so many similarities in how we relate to nature. And, you know, one of the beautiful things about this whole idea, and if I could show this picture, Ku, I think she set it up with me yesterday that I could do this. Here we go. Can everybody see this picture? This is, you know, because I felt like, you know, a picture tells 1,000 words, as the saying goes. This is a picture of sun hemp, which Travis just was speaking about. And you see the yellow flowers. Well, this is when this sun hemp was rolled down and crimped, meaning that there was a roller crimper on the front of a tractor that rolled this sun hemp crop down and crimped it every 7 inches. So this way it died in place and created a beautiful weed mat to be able to plant in. And that weed mat looks like this. Oh no, that's the wrong picture. Anyhow, you could see it in the picture I just showed before, in the middle. And basically that is rolled down and crimped to where that tractor, when it passes through there, on the back end of that tractor can cut with a disc and lay a drip line down, and you can plant taro huli in there, while on either side of this, you let that's a windbreak to protect the plants from the wind. And also you could grow that crop to seed, so you could grow more cover crop seed in order to do another line like that, or, you know, create a system, in other words, to where you're rotating back and forth and doing a similar application. So this is the kind of possibilities that's out there in the use of cover crops. And why we get so excited about this is because of, in the soil, when the soil's alive, there was a study that was done that shows that when you breathe in humus, us organic farmers, us farmers that grow soil, you know, we're breathing in humus, it lifts the spirits. It's great for mental health. And so there's a reason why we're so excited about what this represents, because it actually feeds us on another level. And so that's really a critical component of this. And I would really like Bob to articulate about humic structures, because he talked about our loss of carbon. Graham Strait from Australia came here once, and it was really beautiful how he articulated was that there's only 4 places on this planet that carbon is stored. And that's in plant life, in the soil, in our oceans, and in the sky. And at breakneck speed right now, we're storing it in the sky and in the ocean, where we need to be storing it in our soil and our plant life. And I'd really like Bobby to talk about what happens when the carbon is stored in the soil from humic structures, from the development of humic structures and the breakdown of biological material.
If you'd like. So Vincent is referring to humus, Humus, which for a simple explanation is a very well decomposed, stable form of carbon in the soil. We can slowly increase it by using cover crops. Used to be that we believed erroneously that using cover crops as green manures, you grow the legume up, you turn it in with the tillage, that would raise humus levels. It does not. And the reason for this is, and the point to say that is that to build humus in your soils, we need what is called lignin. Lignin is the harder portions of plants, such as bark, such as roots, or seed coats. For our use as farmers, I promised you I'd only talk as a farmer, we want to, at least for some of the plants that we return back to the soil, have them hardened by age. Now, here in the tropics, a lot of our plants, luckily, do form a lot of lignin. This is the plant's reaction to waves of attack by chewing insects and by fungi that use enzymes to get into the plant. So the plant hardens itself. If we get stronger and we get harder, like our fingernails and our teeth and our bones, we're stronger. The plant gets stronger by lignin. Lignin is decomposed by specialized sets of fungi that create humus. So the biosynthesis chain of humus involves lignin. This is why if we know this, know your crop, know yourself, know your soil. If we know this, we can farm to improve lignin. You know what the best part of the plant is to make humus? The roots. The roots are lignified. They're hard against chewing and motion and grinding in the soil. So if I can grow brassica, which I have here in Hawaii and am doing right now, and if I can grow them to be 1.5 feet, 2.5 foot roots, when that root channel decomposes, which is the third form of carbon it gives, the whole channel relatively changes to humus. So Travis had made some excellent comments about that we have many choices in cover crops to use. And one of the features in plants that we've learned over the years is one species of plant can produce, let's say, 1 pound of carbon per year and 1 pound of nutrients per year. If I plant 3 plants together, and preferably a legume, a forb, and a grass, those 3 act synergistically and they produce 4 pounds instead of 3. The synergism of using legumes, grasses, and forbs is what we are about. This is the triangle of plants that we need to use to gain the most organic matter below ground and above ground and of the right type for our farms and for regenerating soils. Again, I'm not in favor of using cover crops alone. I am in favor of using the 3 practices. And as Travis went through the NRCS groups, we're absolutely agreeing. I cannot find any agronomists or advanced farmers in the world right now that have anything to say more about that. And we're right. We are in a system, we're approaching systems that support both the microbes and the plants simultaneously while we grow more humus in soil, while we develop more humus in soil. We want to make more than we lose, so that way we accumulate.
Yeah.
So Bobby, on that note, then I would encourage everybody to have more of a sense of humus.
I want to share a couple of comments from viewers. Shannon says, I hope this Zoom is being recorded to share later. Yes, absolutely it is. It'll be on our Facebook Live channel. And a comment from Fred, great topic of vital importance to our state. Let's all pitch in to grow our soil. Here's a question from Jason. How do you view the incorporation of livestock in a system to improve soil health? How do you make it work with the cost of infrastructure and the new FSMA regulations? So how do animals fit into this picture?
Big time. Yeah, Bobby.
We're animals. Soil microbes can be referred to as animals. The 9 animals that live on the soil surface underneath the residues that Travis and NRCS are promoting. One of the things, yeah, of course, Vincent, we need to keep Vincent's head and the soil cool. We need to stop raindrop impaction and horizontal movement, but I need someplace for the 9 surface animals to be. That's underneath the residues. I lost the point. What was the question?
Well, incorporating livestock. I can.
Oh, yes, the livestock.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so look, this is imitating nature again. We have buffaloes, we have hooved animals who for centuries, millennia, grazed on grasses, left a little pock marking on the soil, would move on, leaving their manure. And this is like a rotation. This would be the imitation for us in farming of a rotation. I don't actually think, in particular for Hawaii, I don't actually think that we're going to get this done, meaning producing our own food of high quality without significant imports, without using animals. In fact, just the opposite. The last 5 years, I've been studying animals in agriculture, and particularly hooved animals. And I am one who believes that we not only can raise 100% of all of the feed that we need for hooved animals here and others, but that we need those animals to break disease cycles, to improve our soil organic matter levels, to help us in all ways with diversifying the agroecosystem, diversifying the soils ecosystem, and getting healthy soils and healthy environments. We need to have the animals, and we need to have intelligent use of our good friends, the animals, in agriculture, no doubt.
You know, one of the things with that, Julia, I want to invoke a man's name who's no longer with us, Jerry Brunetti. He came here and spoke at Body and Soil Conference, and he had a great definition of using livestock. And he said, you know, cows, when they're eating the grasses, they're eating the proteinaceous tops off the grasses, or when the buffalo roams, you know, and then that, you know, you see cow's nose, it looks like there's sweat. He said that was an exudate. It's not sweat, it's an exudate. And that would be a growth stimulant for the grass to grow back. And when they're grabbing the grass to tug on it, to eat it, it's ripping the roots. And like Bobby was talking about, when the roots are sloughing off in the ground, that's creating humus. And when when you rip the grass off and you're creating then more roots to grow, stimulating more roots to grow. And the cows eat that lignin, the grass. It's the only animal that can eat lignin and turn it into fats, which are essential. And you know, cultures that well known for years, Dr. Weston A. Price back in the early 20s found cultures that when they would harvest the animals, they would eat the organ meats first, the fatty meats, and then they would give the lean meats to the animals. So they valued those essential fatty acids. And so, you know, animals are, you know, when Mahi Pono came here, I encouraged the owners of Mahi Pono, because they sat down with me and asked me, what would you do? I said, I would mob graze this isthmus for 3 years with cows, sheep, and chickens, you know, before you plant anything. And then plant a forest on either end of where the wind corridors coming through the island on both sides, and slow these winds down. Of course, you know, it takes a lot of money to do that. And they paid like $260 million for the isthmus. So who's got that kind of money or political will and commitment other than people who don't have the money?
Well, that actually gets to a comment that we had from Rosalind. She says, what about accountability for who damaged the soil?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is no accountability for people that damage the soil. That should be very much so. A man by the name of Louis Bromfield, I'm sorry, Malabar Farms. He restored Malabar Farms in Pennsylvania, 5 inches of topsoil in 7 years, when they said, no way these lands can come back. And he was going to be the ag secretary of Dewey. And supposedly Dewey won the election, but then Truman's shown holding the paper that Dewey wins the election and Truman won. Well, Louis Bromfield was he wanted to take soil samples of all the counties, because he was so into, you know, the results he got. So that's the cruel joke of, you know, a fork in the road that would happen in our history as far as us protecting our soils. But hopefully Vilsack, Director Vilsack will, and he values soil health, will continue to go down this road to bring more funding towards this. Right,
and then there's also the question that's the story that's unique to Hawaii about the damage to Hawaii's soils.
Absolutely.
And so I think the comment from Rosalind is, you know, where is the accountability for that? What about the idea of lawsuits? She says lawsuits have been settled, but the damage has been done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, looking forward, and hearing your point, Bob, that cover crops are not the end all and the be all here. But back in November, Vince wrote a piece for us called "Regeneration is What We Need Now." And it talked a lot about the power of cover crops and the beneficial ways in which cover crops help soil, and also suggested the creation of a component of the Hawaii's agricultural sector that would be about creating seed, cover crop seed, that could be utilized not just in the islands, but that could be exported, that could be, because of the growing seasons in Hawaii, because you can create seed, maybe get 3 crops a year, really create seed. I mean, as we know, Hawaii has been used as a place to produce seed, but that has been largely GMO seed, corn seed. But what about this idea? Can we discuss this a little bit? The viability of creating a cover crop seed industry that would provide cover crop seed really for the world.
Go, Travis, go.
Yeah, I got it. So, it's interesting. Right before we started this show, Vincent was talking about some strategic planning that he's doing with another organization. And while I do think it is important to have, a source for cover crop seed in this, some of the feedback we get from our producers is it's hard to get cover crop seed, and we want to be able to manage that. But I think part of the solution is, and this is something that Vincent and I have talked about, is getting this partnership, this soil health partnership together, because it's not just cover crops that's the answer. It is this broader spectrum of, soil health and all of these solutions. And it's not one entity that's going to provide this solution for restoring Hawaii's soils. And we've talked about getting partners together and really brainstorming on what does success look like in Hawaii for healthy soils, right? Is it, establishing a cover crop industry? Is it getting some other funding sources where producers can go out there and start to look into adopting minimized tillage, no tillage systems, whatever that may look like? Is it incorporating livestock into our ag systems? I think there are really a lot of solutions out there, but we need to define what success looks like, and then really lining up all of the resources that the partners have to really implement and start moving forward so that we have, and my goal in all of this, Bob talked about a soil health system, a management system, is that every producer in Hawaii, and I cover all across the Pacific, every producer has a soil health management plan where they are mapping where they're at, how they're going to achieve soil health success on their operation. And I really think it's that bigger strategic approach to helping us reach success here in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm. Just so that the viewers know, if somebody is interested in having NRCS come out and talk to them about their soil, is that free? Do they just call you and say, can you come out and have a look? I want to talk to you about my soil. Is it that easy?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So if anybody on the line is interested, they can go to farmers.gov. It's USDA's website for all of the resources that are available to farmers. There's a conserve tab that you can go look at and take a look at some of the programs that are available. There's a contact us tab also. And if they Google their location, or if they type in their location on that website, you'll get a phone number for our office. Check out the location, check out the phone number, come talk to us. I have to admit, we are quite popular because we do provide free services. So sometimes it takes us just a little bit. It's not the next day we'll get out there, but we will do our best to have some of our awesome folks go out and help you walk through that transition, whether you be conventional, organic. We want to help you improve your operation and walk you through the process.
If I may, Julia, folks, I didn't get to mention this, but I'm currently the president of Hawaii Farmers Union United, which is a chapter of the National Farmers Union. I'm the chair of the Regenerative Agriculture Local Food Committee on a national level. And this has been in creating, in working on these platforms that I work on, it really speaks to the importance of us having an agricultural system here in Hawaii, which we don't. And that's why we were bringing these initiatives forward around soil health, restoring our soils, because in essence, the first common denominator as farmers that we need is to build a resilient system to production. And COVID was a gift to us all because it got us to slow down as a nation, as a world, and take a look. Now, nature's still telling us, get back in your room. You haven't quite worked it out yet, come out when you worked it out. But, in essence, though, what needs to be worked out is because we put so much attention to tourism that we have forgotten about the importance of an agricultural system here in the middle of the Pacific. And so I've been advocating through Farmers Union, through the Board of Agriculture, through all the platforms that I feel I have at my disposal to work on this, to bring forward something that we could then sink our teeth into. And that's why the cover crop seed industry was the idea being brought forward, because that could help generate income to fund programs like what Travis has been working to bring forward through federal government assistance. And so, to have people like Bob Shaffer be able to be there at people's disposal, that kind of situation, because in essence, unless we have a government that values agriculture, then the private sector is not going to be so quick to invest. And our state budget right now is 0.4%, less than one half of 1% to agriculture. And when you're telling that to paradise on earth, that's not a budget that's going to bring the kind of success and what we, basically what we need to bring forward in creating that agricultural system.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate how you started there with just coming back again to the foundational nature of soil, to why we're even having this conversation today, why it is so important, because it is the starting point for everything.
It's a place we're all going back to one day. Our bodies are all going back to one day. And yet we only know what, Bob, like about 5% of what goes on underneath the soil. And I'm thinking to myself, if we're going back there one day, why are we not working to be in relationship with it as opposed to poisoning it? I don't get it.
Right. Well, and I think the other big piece, as people become more and more aware of the mysteries of soil and the miracles of soil, is this great understanding of the potential for carbon sequestration in the soil at a time when we're all recognizing that we're in big trouble with carbon. And I'm still a little bit intrigued, Bob. You can tell me whether it's appropriate to go here or not, but I wonder if there weren't things that you witnessed in Australia or things that you learned through your work there that would be interesting for the viewers here. Were there ways that you worked on soil health and soil restoration there, things that you saw happen that you'd like to share with us?
It's actually a great point, because I was surprised at the similarities of problems. The Australians thought that I was walking into their environment not understanding fixed phosphate. Here in Hawaii, those of us who deal with soils and crops understand that the phosphate is strongly fixed. There's 5 ways at least that phosphate is preserved by nature. Nature doesn't want it to get it away. So it locks it up in 5 forms. And the Australians thought, oh, they don't know anything about this. And they threw this in my lap. Well, deal with this. Oh my God. We're going to go back to the system. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to diversify the system. We're going to go through organic matter management, nutrient management, tillage management. We're going to be very successful at this. We've got a number of excellent examples that I've worked on here in Hawaii, where there was a beginning, a transition, and success. We have a number of them in Australia before I came there. We have a number of them that I've helped create now. And so we have, when I was 19, we didn't have a demo. We didn't have a place to refer to. Oh, look at that. Look what we fixed. And everybody thought we were nuts. Now, just the opposite. Show me where this doesn't work. Show me where organic matter management, nutrient management, and tillage management, if carefully executed, does not work. it does work. It's the imitation of nature. I think that Australia has many similarities to our soils here in Hawaii because of the areas in Australia where I worked. I worked in the New South Wales. I worked up in the Queensland. That has very similar climate and weather to ours. The soils are similar enough. We have a little difference in clay species, otherwise chemistry, biology, and physics apply. And it is using these practices as a system to break those fixed phosphate forms, because we can't afford to buy phosphate. We need to incorporate animals, but we need to get that which we have in the soil into available forms. And this is part of what I learned, kind of cross between the two places. One of the things. I don't know how much time we have. You had asked a question earlier.
I was curious to hear, and yeah, I have a comment that's just come in from your fellow farmer there in Kona, Nancy Redfeather, who says, let's talk about those wonderful weeds and the amazing worms. So again, just sort of further contributors to the health of the soil.
I can't say enough about earthworms. I know that there are some issues with earthworms in native forests. However, for us as farmers, and here on the Big Island, we have wonderful species of earthworms that are so beneficial to us. When I went to Australia, not to talk about Australia only, but the same thing applies here. Every day during my workshops, which would be just day on end, every morning I would spend 10 minutes talking about worms. And the Australians were very polite, especially at first few years. They wouldn't any reaction at all. And after 3 days of this, and then mentioning worms throughout the rest of the talk, but in the morning, 10 minutes on worms every day to make sure, because it was in orchard crops. The last day I was there, they brought out a poster to give to me. They said, we thought you would enjoy this. And it was a poster that had been by this gentleman, blank on his name for a moment, anyway, he's the world authority on tropical earthworms, John Blakemore. And they had brought John Blakemore there to key out the earthworms in New South Wales. And they had a whole chart of the entire family structure of these beasts in New South Wales. Again, the earthworm is the largest animal in the soil resource. It's one of the 9 major soil surface animals. And by feeding cover crop residues, by feeding compost, I can put compost out, go back in 5 days, there's going to be worms there. 2 days, there's going to be worms there if they're there, because they recognize the compost as food. Remember, everything we talked about today is about food. This is farming. It's food for us. It's food for the plants. It's food for the microbes that now have become entangled like this through Rhizophage. You've been following Dr. I think his name's Mark Whitmore and Rhizophage. Dr. Whitmore, anyway, I'm messing up his name. There's a gentleman who has now researched what's called Rhizophage, Rhizophay. And he's discovered that whereas we thought we were feeding the plant to the bacteria, and we're feeding roots to bacteria, but the bacteria are being consumed whole by the plant. They're being taken in whole by the plant, extracted for their nutrients and protein, and then ejected. And that ejecta is then used by the bacteria to grow more bacteria, and the plant takes them up again. This is brand new. If you haven't read it yet, it's all over the web, Rhizophage. And this further supports why we are seeing such a profound improvement in our soils from cover crops and carbon being put back in the soil. We're improving the bacteria's diversity and their populations and their health, and they are being consumed directly by the plant.
Yeah, amazing. So here's a follow-up worm question from Amy. She says, I saw a hammerhead worm just last week. How do we deal with these?
Hammerhead worm?
I don't know. What is that?
Is she farming in the ocean?
I don't know. I thought you guys would know. I've never heard of it.
I never heard of a hammerhead worm. You know, as a matter of fact, in my worm bins, I took a microscopic picture of the guy, Gary Green, who did photography for NASA, sand, microscopic photography for sand. He did a TED Talk. We did a TED Talk together. And so he did some microscopic pictures of some of my worm castings, and took 32 pictures at the size of my thumbnail, and made it into a photograph. And it was amazing. You see the proteins and sugars from the worms. It looked like the fat of the land. It was a slime, that, when you hear the fat of the land, I kind of made it like, wow, I guess that's the fat of the land they speak about, because these worms are just producing this amazing exudate. Would you call it an exudate, Bob? What would you call it? It's casting, right? And what comes out the tail end.
And worms will pass their cast. They have a slime layer that they put out that helps them to go through the pore. In that slime layer, they have special organs that secrete calcium carbonate. So they're actually one of the organisms that are now known to put a small amount of calcium carbonate into the soil by synthesis. I know this is crazy. They use it to cement the slime layer in the tunnel to keep it nice, housekeeping.
Yep.
Mm.
Build their hollow.
So I Googled hammerhead, and I know we're short in time, but my recommendation is, so it looks like an invasive worm from Southeast Asia brought in nursery plants. So I'd recommend to anybody that may have some of those issues is talk to your local extension agent. Probably have some, because every operation is different. You never know. But I will say one thing about insects in soils. If anybody is interested out there, NRCS has what's called an in-field soil health assessment. So you can Google NRCS soil health assessment, and there's a checklist of questions. And one of those talks about biodiversity in soil. And it's an indicator of how healthy a soil is. So the more insects you will, if you see bugs that you can see, it's a good indicator that your health is probably on a positive trajectory. So I can't speak about, hammerhead in that arena, but anyway, folks if they're interested, they can check that out.
Yeah.
A part of the strong agricultural system is work like and Nancy Redfeather's doing with the Seed Garden Network, and just, over a long period of years, and all these different, the kind Ken from tropical fruit growers, just all the work that all these people are doing across the state. We just got to bring them all together, and piece this puzzle. And Ken Love, the work that he's done on tropical fruit has been amazing over all the years. And so it's really important that we just strategize in a way that all this resource is not wasted or not lost in disconnect, that we can make these connections in a way that build this agricultural system to feed off of itself, to build resiliency. Because I think that's one of the key components we've lost here in Hawaii, is having a resilient ability to not only feed ourselves. When I hear people talking about ramping up our farms, I go, oh my God, please, not yet. Some farms you can. There are resilient to where because farmers put in infrastructure that's bigger than usually they're producing. But for the most part, when you overproduce your system, it creates problems. And then you have to get into a lot of rescue kind of situations. So really important that we build resilient systems. And that's why I'm working with Travis right now to develop a stakeholder gathering. We want to have it facilitated to where all the stakeholders will come to the table in a series of meetings, and we can then determine direction to building that system and to have a way to fund it. So stay tuned.
Well, certainly, Civil Beat, this month we kicked off our Hawaii Grown series, and we're going to be looking at agriculture for the entire year, a lot of different dimensions of it. But I'm really happy to start with soil. I know we'll be returning to soil. I hope we will actually return to soil with Ray Archuleta, and we'll be able to do the show with him that we were anticipating. We're
Civil Beat rocks it, and with Ulupono. And Ulupono, the local food initiative, we're part of that. Hawaii Farmers Union, along with the Farm Bureau, along with all the ranchers, we're part of the coalition to go to legislature in support of agriculture. And so, really appreciate the efforts of Ulupono and Civil Beat, and the owner has really done a masterful job to bring these issues to the table and get people talking about it all. So really appreciate all that.
Yeah, so we're just close, we're over an hour at this point, and I, as a sort of a last point, I'd love to ask each of you to talk about, at this point, the subject for today was restoring Hawaii soil. So just looking forward, if you have 1, 2, 3, however many, just a sort of a practical thoughts about what needs to happen next. What is the most valuable thing, if there was going to be one step that you would like to see, that you felt would be a viable, significant step in the direction of restoring our soils? What would that be? Do you want to start with that, Bob?
Sure. We do not live as farmers interested in soil in a vacuum, and we need the participation of the public. We need education to help the public to make right choices. We can grow great food. We can get healthy soils, and we can grow great food, but we do have to have people make the right choices. I really believe that we touched on the integration of animals and looking at the farm as imitating nature. And I believe strongly that we can build an ag system here in Hawaii that very much so incorporates animals into that system in a humane way and in a beneficial way for all of us to build soil. I do not want to import materials. The 2014 NOAA report from Honolulu showed that we're wasting hundreds and hundreds of tons of fish scraps into the ocean and into the landfill that could be fermented, composted, and brought into the land. Hundreds of tons a week. And we need these materials. We need to grow the great grasses that we have here. We had the University of Hawaii and Eddie Hasegawa in 1920 bring 5 or 6 elite species of grasses and legumes to Hawaii for cattle. They've escaped out into our environment, and they're considered weeds now. Guinea grass is considered a weed. Guinea grass is one of the best grasses that we have if we put it to work in the right way. Guinea grass beats other things. I love guinea grass. I'm trying to incorporate guinea grass. We have so many tools already here in Hawaii to build our soils, but we do need the consumption of the foods that we grow. And we do need people to understand what our health is and where it comes from, which is from the soil, to help us.
Okay, that makes so much sense. Travis, you want to come in next?
Yeah, thanks, Julia. So much like Bob, I envision, so our vision within NRCS is one of resilient islands with clean and abundant water, healthy soils, and thriving agricultural communities. And I think a way to achieve this, we really need people to think differently or change the way that they think about soil, right? Soil isn't just this transactional medium, if you will, where we grow our food, but it really is this long-term living resource that has economic and environmental value. And I have a lot of great team members. A shout out to Amy Koch, who's our assistant director for soil science. She is our lead on soil health, and she is really leading the way to do some great things. She's a rock star, and we have soil health representatives in all our offices across the Pacific. And I think if we're going to change the way people think about soil health, I think that next step would to be, I mentioned this earlier, would to have every producer have a soil health management plan that really details how they are going to improve health on their operation. And I recognize Hawaii alone has over 7,000 operations. So I would just say to Vincent and Bob and others in the Conservation Partnership, we got a lot of work to do. There's some room for us to grow and get that work done. So thank you so much, Julie and Civil Beats team.
Yeah, sure. Vince, your thoughts? What needs to happen next?
You know, Julia, you've heard me say this before. I feel Hawaii agriculturally is a Lamborghini sitting in the driveway. We need to take it out for an agricultural spin. Having people at the helm of NRCS like Travis is just amazing, because a lot of the times we get people heading these divisions that just don't have a clue in the spirit of what, you know, how to take that Lamborghini out for a spin. So really appreciate Travis and all the work that he's doing. And, you know, a couple of things that I would like to address here is go to YouTube, folks. You know, you can check out Drake Weinert, who's the president of our East Hawaii chapter, Chris Trump. These are all trained people on Korean natural farming practices. You can learn how to make these amendments from your yard. You know, I'm just making this great amendment from milk and lactic acid bacteria I'm fermenting, and where no smell and no flies occurs. From 20 milligrams to 5 gallons of water, I can get this result. You know, so go to YouTube and seek out these gentlemen. You can learn these things to be able to help build your soils and feed your plants. Grow something you love. My wife Irene always tells people, because when she was pregnant with our little girl, she was craving sunflower greens, and now we've grown 500,000 pounds in the past 27 years on 2,500 square feet, you know, of sunflower greens. Go figure. So, you know, grow something you love, and then just do it on a small scale. Do whatever you're doing on a small scale to where you get it right, you know, to where you have it dialed in, and then nature will be consistent with you. You know, you just dial into nature's architecture, like Ray Archuleta says, you know, emulate nature's architecture, find out, and there's all this information out there. You know, you just have to seek it. If you have the passion, if you're still on this call, you know, and you know, you're like, yeah, I love soil. Well, that's the only thing you need. The only thing you need is loving this subject. And then from moving on from there, you'll be successful. And then also become a member of Hawaii Farmers Union. And the reason why I ask that is hfuu.org. The reason I say that is because numbers matter, and the legislature listens to national farming organizations. That's why I do the work that I do. It's not like I got a bunch of extra time on my hands, folks, you know. So become a member of HFUU, and then we'll do the work that's necessary to continue to bring forward the importance of soil health. And thank you so much for holding this space today, Julia.
Yeah.
And
And I
Kulu in the background.
And yeah, and cool. And I want to encourage everybody too, in case you're not aware of it or you haven't seen it yet, on Netflix at the moment, you can see Kiss the Ground, which is a wonderful documentary about soil regeneration, carbon sequestration in the soil. And Ray Archuleta really is one of the great heroes of that film. So even though he wasn't here with us
32 years.
there.
Yes,
and,
32 years with NRCS, Ray
Yeah.
Archuleta.
one
No,
of
he's a retired NRCS man. And then also, if I may, one more thing, Paul Stamets, you know, go see the movie Fantastic Fungi, because Paul speaks about the mycelial network that Bob's been articulating in this, that's under the ground. And he's actually taking that mycelial network and making it into extracts that's saving the bee population. And he also has an FDA approval to study COVID, treating COVID with the mycelial network through San Diego State University. So some amazing work that's occurring. And Paul Stamets spoke at our convention. You can get that online at our website, get access to that. So, you know, there's a lot of great stuff out there, folks. So just explore, and all the best to you.
And I think that brings us back around to the point that you were making too, Bob, about just that there is so much that we don't know, but the more that we do learn, the more extraordinary we see it all is, you know, how complex it is and how elegant at the same time. So the main thing is to respect it and to take care of it and not to destroy it or disrupt it too much. So on that note, thank you all for being here. Thanks to the viewers for being with us and for your comments and your questions. We'll be back next Wednesday at 2 p.m. And to all of you, we wish you all the best in your soil-related endeavors. Aloha, everyone.
Stay positive and test negative.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha.